All right, let's, Mr. Gordon's going to speak next, but while he's getting ready to speak, let's bring the rest of the people up here. I know there's 2 or 3 more people, and I want to thank everyone here for being so patient. This has been a much longer hearing than we anticipated, only because the subject is so fascinating. Never before in all the hearings I've attended have I seen so many members of both the State Board and the Assembly Education Committee, and even a member who's not on the Education Committee, sit so long, because we all believe this topic is so critical to the future of our state. And I think we're just spending a lot more time than I anticipated, because we have a lot more questions, and it's just fascinating here. So let's try to, this is the last of the public comment, I believe. Anyone else out there? Yes. So let's try to keep the comments fairly short. Don't repeat someone else. Let's try to keep your comments focused on items of information that perhaps we haven't heard yet.
Mr. Chairman and members, Kevin Gordon with the California School Boards Association. In the interest of moving forward, I will. Couple of observations. I look at all this. First of all, I want to mention to you that, and I had sent a copy of this report to all of you when it was a preliminary report. I sent another copy with a cover letter when it was a final report. This report has recommendations in it that were created by CSBA, and the work that was done on this report was done before, a whole year before the state task force was appointed. We gave this report to the chairman of the task force, the reading task force, and if you take a look at their state reading task force, the inside cover, there's a box that says that it was this CSBA set of recommendations that became basically the groundwork for what was produced in that report. So I want to emphasize that CSBA has been very concerned about this issue as locally elected board members, and as I've watched this hearing, I've seen a phenomenon that I saw with our board leadership. They are elected by the public, representing taxpayers, parents, and others. They're not the experts. And when we're seeing the power that those philosophers or whatever have as they try to sort of get a grip on the system. And how do the people who really have the power, that's the legislature, the locally elected board, the superintendent of public instruction, fix this without the locusts coming back in 7 years? I mean, the real task here is to make sure we do what Dr. Carnine said. Follow what works based on the research. And if we all, instead of repeating this credo or whatever somebody said earlier about they'll take the credo back of phonics, the credo has to be what works based on research. And we know that what that is the explicit approach, the systematic and explicit approach to learning reading, and that's what this report's all about. And so the other thing I want you to think about is that a lot of people have talked about, I've heard so many stories about the cabal in different districts of people that want to basically put pressure on and bully those who really want to return to phonics and all this other things. If you really think about it, that what we've had in terms of whole language is the sheep we're following. They were being led by the state, by us. It does start at the top, and what you learn is the power of the framework. It's incredibly powerful. And I know, Steve, ever since he's gotten here, Mr. Chairman, that you've been talking about this issue about phonics, but the power of the framework, until we change the framework, and when we look at the power of this program advisory, you will see that there will be a huge following. Yes, there will be remnants of folks who will hold on to the old system, but there will be a great following. And there is a way that from the top on down, that the system bullies everyone right down to the classroom teacher. And that you all heard me testify earlier today about some tenure reform issues and stuff like that. But the bottom line is that there are circumstances where I'm sure if they had the ability to, teachers would have gotten fired over their insistence on wanting to keep phonics and this sort of systemic approach in the classroom, and that would have been too bad. Anyways, there are lots of other things I could say to support this. I appreciate sitting through all this because I've learned a lot, and again, my commendation to all of you for being here and sticking it out this late as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Berry.
Representative from the State Department of Education testified earlier that individual school districts are autonomous and free to adopt any program they want to adopt.
Correct.
So why don't we blame the school districts for adopting the wrong program?
First
State
of all,
framework, I guess.
absolutely.
She said the state framework was suggestive or...
Correct. And I thought you shot back rather appropriately that when you take a look at instructional materials and the CSU teacher training programs and the influence that has on the system, and people who get into the system saying, this is the system that'll work, it has that effect that I was telling you, that corrosive effect.
Can a school board, a school district adopt any program they want?
Absolutely, they can. And in our report, what we recommend...
We had some testimony earlier that they needed waivers. They needed waivers to use the open court.
They do on instructional materials, and believe me, you hit a brick wall when you then are facing a whole bunch of instructors in your schools that have been taught under a teacher training program that says this is the one best way. So there are these sort of systematic things that corrupt that system. And so while boards may have some flexibility, it's why I put so much emphasis on the fact that if CFT has great articles, CTA sat here and talks about backing what we're talking about in terms of reform, the school boards back it, the legislature supporting it. We got to make it more than a fad, but we've got to base it on, as I said before, what works based on research. And hopefully we'll be able to keep it and sustain it based on that. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone here have to catch a plane?
I have to,
You don't count.
if I could, I know it's late for you, but it's 10 minutes of 1 for me, so.
We'll let you go next. You're from the East Coast, I know.
This is, I'm Bob Sweet. I'm president of the National Right to Read Foundation, and Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your persistence and for what you're doing for not only California, but for the nation, and all the members of the committee for staying here. What I have heard today, I hear replicated daily with hundreds and hundreds of people, parents in every state in the union. We are a volunteer organization. We have people in every state in the union, and I can tell you that state legislature after state legislature after state legislature is going through exactly the same process that you are here. This is a century-old problem at a minimum. I have here a very favorite book of mine. It's Dick Said, Look, Look, Look Up, Look Up, Up. This was first printed in 1914. Every 4 years thereafter, Scott Forsman, with this very nice little money machine, printed textbook after textbook after textbook. I have just reviewed the 1996 copyright of another major publishing company. This one says The New Basic Readers. You can match it very closely to what this New Basic Reader, this happens to be a 1956 copyright, with the current editions of the publishing industry's rendering of what they are doing to respond to the public demand for phonics instruction. You will find phonics written all through these books, but it is not the kind of explicit systematic phonics that Barbara Foreman was talking about. It is not the explicit phonics that Dr. Carnine talked about or Dr. Lyons talked about. There is material available. It is not something that is unknown to people. There are school districts after school, or individual schools for sure, that I have personally visited all over this country where the same kinds of results you heard from individuals who are teaching children, all children, to read. I heard several comments here where they said, we teach them all to read. I hear that story daily from master teachers. Here is a book I just brought with me, just as an example. You can buy this for $5. It's produced by the Weiss family in Richmond, Virginia. It is a program to teach an individual, anyone, to read using explicit systematic phonics as a first step toward reading that wonderful literature we're all here and we all want kids to have. Of course we do. There are plenty of other programs. You have many of them here in the state of California. You have master teachers who are well able to advise your textbook selection committee on some of the wonderful programs out there that are being used successfully to teach people to read. My question, and I have testimony I've passed out, and I'm just going to summarize and ask you to consider 2 or 3 specifics, and then I'll be done. First off, when I heard that there were 25 programs that were being reviewed, my question, as I listened to it, who's reviewing it? And are any of those programs, or are you excluding programs that do not follow an explicit systematic phonics approach? I suspect that that is not the case. I suspect that many of the very good programs that don't have the financial resources to send thousands of copies of their material to the selection committee won't even be included in this process. And I can give you, be glad to work with the committee in any way you would like, I can give you lists of products out there that are very effective in the classroom that will teach this decoding process very simply and very directly. And so I would just encourage you that as you consider the actual selection, text selection material, that you make sure, if you can, that all of the products that teach explicit systematic phonics that are on the market today are included. And the second thing I'd like to suggest is this. You're working on the framework here in California. What you do here in California is going to affect all the states in the union. You and Texas, I might add, are in a race for who can get the framework in place quick enough so that the textbook companies will follow your lead, because you both buy textbooks by the millions. And if the framework reflects what I saw in the document just passed out here, from I think State Board is going to get a copy tomorrow. Temporary spelling is included. Yes, they say explicit systematic phonics, but I can tell you that the way they describe it is it's one of 4, quote, queuing systems. I hear this until I don't want to hear it anymore. It's a regurgitation, if you will, about the very stuff that has been around this country for the last century. Now, we have a very serious situation, and the reason why I think it's important for us to stay as late as need be here, we are dividing people up into those who can read and those who cannot. I spent time at the Justice Department, and I commissioned, by the way, Becoming a Nation of Readers, that my good friend Bill Honig said he didn't understand. Well, Rudolph Flesch called me after that publication was issued back in 1985, shortly after he passed away, and he told me that it was the first time the federal government did anything worthwhile in presenting direct systematic phonics. Well, it wasn't as complete as we'd like to have it, but it was very clear to him, and it certainly was to me. When I was at the Justice Department, I commissioned another study called Retarding America. It came out, it's in published form now, Retarding America, the Imprisonment of Potential. There is a direct linkage between the delinquency problem in America and those who can't read. And there is something that's being done about it. We set up a few programs with the Justice Department that retrained the teachers in explicit direct phonics consistent with what Dr. Foreman presented today. So I guess in summary, I would suggest that if there's any way that our organization or myself can help in making sure that we lock this down in California, that we don't go on into the 21st century with simply redefining the thing that was at one time look and say, then became whole word, then psycholinguistics, then whole language, and now it'll be explicit systematic phonics, and it's all going to be the same stuff.
I see, you're saying, let me back up, you're saying the program advisory that we were handed to tonight, which is not the final, I understand.
Right.
But you're saying that the version that we saw tonight is not an acceptable version in your view?
No, it is not, and one of the reasons, Mr. Chairman, that I'm concerned about it is I heard the person presenting it saying that they were going to that the International Reading Association was reviewing it and were going to make recommendations. Maybe you read in U.S. News and World Report John Leo's column about the new standards that came out. The International Reading Association and the National Council of Teachers of English came out with a document which is being circulated all around I'm sure in the state of California and all around the country. It codifies whole language by their very admission. They have 12 points, they say. Well, it's the many queuing systems, and it's the same stuff, just a retooling of it. So
they're working on a final version, so I don't know how different the final version is going to be from what we have here tonight. But I would certainly like your comments on the final version when it does come out. Now, when you were at the Justice Department,
yes,
they actually had you prepare a study on the link between juvenile crime and lack of reading ability.
yes. That study, there is this, the study was done by a fellow that we hired who did a 3-year review of the research or the practices in juvenile facilities. That is, what percentage of youngsters who are put in juvenile detention can't read, and the percentage was extremely high, I think something like 85 or 90%. And then they showed that there was a relationship between the delinquency problems these kids had. They dropped out of schools, they got on drugs, they couldn't get a job. One boy, for example, went all the way through high school. He was in detention, but he went all the way through high school, graduated, couldn't read his own diploma, and went to get a job at a meatpacking plant and couldn't read the labels, and so they fired him. I mean, this is typical of what happens with these youngsters. They have.
Yes, we'd
Sir?
like to see copies
Yes,
of that
sir.
report.
Glad to do that. And I realize I'll stop there, but I just offer this, Mr. Chairman, that as your committee.
How many, now you've got chapters in every single state, National
Yeah.
Right to Read
Yes.
Foundation.
Yeah.
And you've seen this battle in all 50 states. Where are we compared to other states? Are there any states focusing on systematic explicit phonics as the main method of reading right now?
I would say that probably Virginia, which just so happens I served on the commission with
The
Governor
Standards
Allen.
Commission?
Yeah.
Great
Governor
standards. I
Chan-
saw the standards
Right.
produced in Virginia. Excellent standards.
Yeah, well, that's one example. In Massachusetts, 40 linguists recommended that the State Framework Committee go back to explicit systematic phonics. I haven't seen the final version. I've seen a draft of it, but what makes me concerned is it's similar to what I saw in the preliminary version of what I read here today, that they are using some of the terminology, but it isn't really getting to the heart of the matter. So very few of the states that I'm working with, and I'm consulting in Michigan, and basically being stiff-armed there too, even though the chairman of the state board is demanding that they get back to some systematic phonics along with the rest of the state board.
Is that Clark Durant?
Yeah, Clark Durant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been consulting with him, so or with that committee. They had a $1.5 million, I think it is $1.5 million grant from the U.S. Department of Education to help develop standards, and basically Michigan standards are the whole language philosophy codified. So. Texas, they say, we'll see how it goes, but Texas is working toward coming up with something that's going to be more explicit. For example, in Houston Independent School District, they have a committee where I think Barbara Bush is the chair, that is honorary chair, and she may be presenting something to the superintendent within the next 2 or 3 days here. And they tell me Barbara Foreman's influence in Houston is getting explicit phonics in there. But I can tell you that we're up against a very awesome force. We haven't talked a lot about it, but it's well-funded. It includes a lot of the big associations, the textbook industry, and the teachers.
Mr. Firestone brought up this question earlier. Is there any kind of profit motive involved in the promotion of whole language? And the people we asked before really didn't know one way or another. What would be your response to that?
The answer is absolutely, because I used to work for Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston Publishing Company, and I have a very personal interest in this. I worked for the textbook business for a while before I got wise to them. And they told us, when Holt did not have a reading program, this was back in the 60s actually, that within 5 years, once the program was developed, that 3/4 of the revenue for that company was going to come from the reading program, because it's like razor blades. They just buy the materials over and over and over in first, second, and third grades. It's repeat material. I don't know how you do it here in California, but a lot of supplementary ancillary material, very colorful, very attractive. Whole language materials look great. They really do. But it is extremely expensive. And in fact, your reference, sir, to the reading
Or why
recovery.
couldn't they make the same profit off a prophonics book? I mean, why would a profit incentive be greater with whole language materials than with phonics materials?
Because teaching children to read, well, you really reallocate your resources in a different way. If you teach all of your children to read, then you can use trade books, you can use good quality materials that last for a long time, and you can have a nice library of materials in the classroom. But when you buy materials that are not doing the job, then you end up cost-wise with special education, Chapter 1, bilingual education, and in special ed, for example, last year nationally we spent over $38 billion nationally and statewide for special education. 80% of the youngsters in special education simply can't read.
Are you saying that there is a conspiracy intentionally to have children not learn to read so that they can sell them in special education?
Well, what I want to do is fix the problem. I think I don't know
Well,
that.
for phonics books, their books, and they sell, and they,
Well, if you-
publishers make money off of
Right.
it too, do they not?
Well, I wouldn't call it a conspiracy. If you want to say making a lot of money on the material
Is there money made on phonics material?
well, there's not very much phonics material sold.
Is there money made on phonics material?
Well, there's money made on everything that's purchased for instructional practices, but the more costly, in fact, the study, now that I think about it, the study that was released, I think, in 1993, evaluated the cost of whole language programs versus direct systematic phonics programs. And the cost per pupil for direct systematic phonics programs was far less. It was like a third of the cost of what the whole language program is.
Could we get that study?
Yeah, that study's available as well.
Just on to the fact that it cost was between
40 and 150, yeah. No. Well, that's,
Could we very much get that study, please?
I can get
Were you
both of
about
those.
to mention?
Reading recovery?
Yes.
I was. Five studies have been done. The Battelle study, the Shanahan study, the Hebert study, one here that I just read on the plane on the way out, which is 1995, that was published in the Reading Research Quarterly, and this was done in New Zealand. Anyway, Margaret McNaught, and this is at Sydney, South Wales, Australia. It is, all of the studies to date have been consistent in their findings. That number one, it is an expensive program, partly because it's tutorial, that it requires extensive teacher training, at least a year, and the University of Ohio sponsors Reading Recovery. They sell this program. In fact, I called there just the other day, and they are very proud of the fact that not only can you get into Reading Recovery, you can get into their next level program. Now, I don't know, I can't believe somebody isn't making money on it. I haven't seen their R&D.
What is the money trail? Where does it
Well,
end?
the money trail is they're selling materials to the schools, and people are buying it, and somebody's making a profit. I haven't seen their...
Is there a pattern with all 5 studies?
Yes, it is. The pattern is the same. The pattern shows that there is virtually no carry-through. If you test these kids at, say, 4th and 5th grade, that you wouldn't know that most of them had been in it. I mean, in other words, it doesn't... The findings don't show that it
Doesn't include phonics to the degree
No.
that its proponents say?
It doesn't include phonics, period. It's including the term phonics now because that's the new, as the professor said, this is the new wave. We all want to, but no, it is. Marie Clay, in her own document, says, let's see, I know it's late here, but Clay also, this is Marie Clay, who is the author of Reading Recovery. She says,
I know, we're going to wrap it up here.
Clay does not stress explicit instruction in another skill, phonological decoding, and so forth. That's Reading Recovery, so.
I've already missed my flight to Los Angeles, so I'd like to make a brief
Wrap
statement.
it up, 2 minutes,
Okay.
3 minutes.
We should mention for the, yes, most of us started about 7:30 this
Sure.
morning.
Right.
Right.
And we took no break for dinner. Most of us didn't have lunch either.
Okay, I'll be brief. I'm Dr. Mary Hoover. I'm the president of the National Association of Black Reading and Language Educators, professor of education at Howard University on leave at the Compton Unified School District, where I'm director of remedial reading. I'm a former reading teacher here in the state of California and the author of a book called Successful Black and Minority Schools, as well as the author of one of the few secondary phonics programs in the country called Patterns for Reading. And I'm going to skip my prepared statement on the problem. I think we're all familiar with the 46% illiteracy rate among students of color, the disproportionate number of students of color in special ed classes. I had a whole section on that, but I'll just move on to the question that has come up over and over and over again here. Why? And for the last 30 years, because I have focused my entire career for 30 years on what works. Again, this book has cost me many a job, many a consultancy, et cetera, because phonics has not been the popular approach in this country. Why? There's an unholy alliance between the professors of education, the publishing companies, the organizations, the International Reading Association, for example, and the testing service as well. You say, is it collusion? Is it a conspiracy? Well, if you examine the authors of the tests in the country, you'll see the same publishers are the authors of the test. You'll see the same professors of education, the authors of these same books, and they're making money on the backs of our children. This is a business. And the question came up, why is it, does phonics produce, does look, say, more expensive than phonics? The issue is they have to put out something every 10 years to make money every 10 years. They come up with a new method. I went through Look, Say in the 50s, and then there was language experience, and it's all beautiful approaches, if combined ever with phonics, but never with phonics. Then there was, now we have whole language. Without going through the whole set, every decade there's a new approach to prevent. As one person said, it's almost like a conspiracy not to teach children of color, particularly because they are the ones who are disproportionately affected by this miseducation. And so I'm just very pleased that you're having this hearing. That's not all. The Unholy Alliance, the fact that our own government supports the lack of this miseducation. Head Start prevents the teaching of reading. I took a group of my trained tutors at Howard to a principal and offered to come in and tutor the children at age 2. That's the age I taught my children to read. And I was told, oh no, if I even mention the word reading, my funds will be removed, my Head Start money. I said, well, what's more important, your Head Start money or the children learning how to read? Well, I'm sure you can imagine what the answer was. The answer was the money. And so we've got this situation where...
Tell us about Compton.
What's that?
You're teaching at Compton, one of the lower performing
yes, I'm getting
schools
to
in the
that.
state.
I'm
We want to
getting to
hear
that.
what you're doing there.
Okay.
And are you actually improving academic scores there?
Yes, I'm moving to that. I'll just go on to solutions. The first one, of course, is you. I'm very proud to have spent most of my life in California. You're the only state that I know of who's actually taken a bill, made legislation to the effect that there will be a phonic approach to reading. So I'm very proud. That's number one solution. The second one is that I think is very important is that districts be mandated to select a proven approach to reading, not just something. I'm coming, sir. A proven approach to reading. Number 3, we think that it should be at all levels. At Compton, we've done something unusual. You have not been trained to think of Compton and other low-income districts as doing anything of import. Someone came from the state, as a matter of fact, last week and asked us 4 times. They said, now, do you have an innovative approach to reading that's based on research? And I raised my hand 3 different times to say, yes, we have something called superliteracy. It's innovative. It's based on research. 3 times the lady asked me, well, do you have an innovative approach to reading that is based on research? Yes, we do. But somehow, I know you've all been trained to think that such innovation cannot come out of...
You're doing something unique. You're doing a phonics program.
Yes, for secondary, right, secondary students. But we're moving on. We have adopted one of the non-systematic phonic approaches against my wishes, but we are using the bill that Mr. Murray had passed, introduced for us, AB 174. We intend to, at least a group of us intend to, we hope that it works, to be able to adopt one of the systematic phonic approaches as well. Again, we have an approach, and teachers, don't let anyone tell you teachers don't want don't want to learn, don't want to be experts. As one of the teachers stated, my children love the big words because I love the big words. They love the schwa. When we get to the schwa, we attack these words and systematically and with rules and so on. They love it. So don't let anyone convince you that what someone testified earlier, that whole language is fun and that miseducate children because something is fun. I think teachers also think really teaching is fun. 30 years.
In Compton.
Oh, in Compton, just says August. So we don't have any scores yet, but again, we've used it for 25 years across the country. Certainly, but it originated in California. I have 20 schools and districts I can tell you about. I can't tell you about Compton yet, but we thought it was important. if you've spent millions of dollars on a method with no research whatsoever, we thought it was important that you at least know about a method that does have a research base, that has been introduced, but we don't have the effects yet.
A lot of different programs come to Compton, and I'm not aware of any of them that have worked.
Well, there's always a first time for everything.
Are you by yourself advocating phonics in the Compton Unified? Are there any
No,
others?
it was interesting how I was brought in. I was brought in by the state administrator at the time, Dr. J.
Okay.
Jerome Harris. And what is interesting is the new state administrator, Dr. Harris left, the new state administrator, Dr. Law, formerly of the State Department here, is also supportive of what we're trying to do. And so it's an interesting, as I said, I'm not saying the state administration is the way to go, but it just shows you how difficult it is to get a phonics program introduced into a district.
When do you think you'll have some results?
Well, it's usually about the second year that we get dramatic results. In 3 years, we get almost 2 years growth per semester. But I think we'll have some preliminary results this time, even though it was, you can imagine, June 30th, when the scores come back. We think we'll have some scores. But as again, you've supported methods that didn't have any research at all.
What grades are you using?
10,000 students in grades 6 through 12 who read below the 35th percentile on the CAT-E test are in the program. And we have 100 teachers, brave souls, because it's been, just as many have stated, the culture in most of our districts supports this whole language, the entire culture. And so they're going against the grain in so many ways. I'm so proud of them. If you ever have a chance to come to Compton, come and see these students. One student, one of the teachers talked about a student in her top achieving group, not group, but her top achieving class. She had 6 sections in 7th grade English. And the top group, she just gave them our schwa test. The schwa is one of the patterns that we've developed, CAT-E look-alike tests to fit the different patterns of reading. And she said that her top scoring students, when she gave them the test, she just gave them the test to see what would happen. They failed it. And their feelings were terribly injured. Why are we being deprived of the schwa? They said. Because they felt that just shows you children really want to learn, I believe, and teachers want to teach.
6 through 12.
Right.
And it's all children who score below the
35th percentile on the CAT-E.
Well,
What percentage of the total?
It's about a third.
About a third.
Well, Dr. Hoover, I think everyone here is wishing you the best, because if you can show academic performance at Compton, a district we're all very worried about,
Yes,
then that really helps us showcase the power of phonics.
right.
And so
I was
we're
asked,
really
would I
wishing you
come
the best.
to Compton and help the students? It took me 30 seconds to say yes. And I canceled my other contract and came here. And again, I have not regretted that. And I think we'll have something to show a little bit this year, but lots next year.
Fantastic. Alrighty, next. Who are we going with next here? Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Sally Robison. I'm a first grade teacher in Sacramento. I'm a trained reading recovery teacher, and I have an LDS, a language development specialist, which means I work with bilingual children. I thought maybe I'd let you guys ask me some questions because you were so interested about reading recovery.
Well, just real briefly, what...
Knocking it all day.
Does it work? No.
What's your experience with it?
What? Does it work? No, I don't think it does.
Is it expensive?
Extremely so. It cost over $6,000 to train
Well, I
me.
heard a lot of numbers. First we started at 2,300, then Brooks said.
No, my training. No, we're not talking about how much it cost for the child.
Comparable figures.
Oh.
How much it costs per child? That's what
Oh,
they-
per child. Well, are you going to include the teacher's salary, which is, okay, well, I'm worth about $50,000, including benefits. And that lady was inaccurate when she said that the resource teacher, the reading recovery teacher only takes 4 students at a time, not
How
10.
many students do you take in a year?
I took 6
In a year?
in a year.
Is that because you're only had 6 students doing a whole year period?
Only 4 at a time, and then 2 were let go and 2 more were added.
So you have to divide 50,000 by 6 to figure
No,
out that?
25. It's
10 weeks or something like that.
No, it's 16 weeks.
Oh, that's right. You got And so
I had 6 students a whole year because some of those kids were longer than 16 weeks.
So you only saw
6 children.
6 children during the whole year?
Well, I saw one boy that had poor attendance and he was dropped, so you could count him as 7. But actual instruction, 6 kids.
Anyhow, we figured out before it was 30 kids you would see.
So
Oh, no.
it's your opinion that money could have been used for systematic phonics at the
Oh,
beginning?
absolutely, because you in the red dress, you were right. There is no phonics in
To
it.
pursue this a little bit further, it wasn't only your salary, there was certainly some royalties, or where did all the money go? It was,
Well, the people that publish the little books, I brought some, they make tons of money. Every reading recovery teacher owns tons of these little books. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these books. The training is expensive. It's $6,000, and then you're required to go to the conference at Disneyland Hotel, and you have to even buy more supplies because there's certain things you need that you have to buy additionally. And then once you are trained, whenever you teach reading recovery, you forever have to continue to go to continuation training. So you're never finished with your training.
to be a licensed reading recovery person and
Well, I don't think they'll take away your diploma or your PIN, but they frown upon it if you don't go through forever continuation training every year you work the
I
program.
would suggest that this is the subject of a whole other hearing, and I'm inclined to join this this audit because there seems to be an incredible amount of money being spent without a great deal of recovery.
Well, the thing is,
Incredible amount of money for one student, but it's not a credible.
I think perhaps it is such a maybe we shouldn't
They
pursue
told
it.
us earlier it was all federal money,
Yeah.
no state money in there.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest that
I was half
on
comp
this.
ed money, so that 25,000, but my principal really wanted me this year to do it for 50,000, and I told her absolutely not. It's just too expensive. So she wanted me to do like 4 kids at a time, like in the morning, and then do like helping 6th graders with their writing or something or other. And I said, that's ridiculous, because the cheapest way to do it is to let someone teach kindergarten, and on the other half of the day, then they do reading recovery. But it's really strenuous to try to fit the 4 kids in. But that is the only economic way. But forgetting that, it really doesn't work. It's just whole language. If you read
doesn't
this,
work.
it doesn't work.
It's very expensive and it doesn't
Well,
work.
in my opinion, you could line up other people that teach reading recovery, and they will say it does work. The whole time I was doing it, I was frustrated because I wanted to do what I knew worked, which is phonics, systematic phonics,
Why didn't you do it?
because I was told by my district, we're piloting this, and don't do what you normally do, just do what they tell you to do. So I sat really frustrated because I knew what I needed to do, but I couldn't do it.
So would you say a lot of the blame rests with school board members or
No, the school
administrators?
board didn't even know I
for
was
not doing the
doing it.
research on these issues?
The school board didn't know you were doing it.
No, I saw 2 school board members, and they didn't realize I was doing it.
Who gave you the instruction to do it?
My principal. I originally didn't, well, someone told her that every child that was serviced would never be on the Title I fund, in the Title I funding program. They would test so high, and they would be, forever cured of any problems. But the problem is, too, like in our kindergartens at least, they don't teach anything. Like, they come to me.
Right.
Well, they come to me, they don't even know their letters, their sounds, anything hardly. So I have to start in 1st grade doing like the kindergarten, but yet the kindergarten teachers make a list telling us which children are going to need to be recovered, but what are we recovering? But they don't have anything yet, so you give them this extensive test that takes like 45 minutes to an hour, and they get very low grades, and then we're supposed to pick the lowest of the lowest. And if you have bilingual kids, like this year I have 24 bilingual students, and only 8 children in my class are English speaking from birth, then all those kids usually test low. So that doesn't mean they really are low. It means that they just haven't had it, and sometimes, you know, the language blocks it too. But this year, the other teacher that does reading recovery wanted two of my students. She said the the kindergarten teacher just said that these two students were low, and I said, I'd only had them like a week and a half, but I could tell they were not. I said, no way. I said, it'd be a waste of your time and a waste for them to do it. You need to find somebody else that needs it. So it turned out that these two students that the kindergarten teacher said should have it are two of my highest students in my class. And I don't have any kids being serviced in reading recovery because my kids all can read because I do
And you-
systematic, explicit
What
phonics.
you're losing that federal money now by not having those kids.
But I wanted to tell you that there is a very excellent program. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, since people are talking about programs, Sing, Spell, Read, and Write. It was actually developed by a first grade teacher. It's International Learning Systems. Oh, wait a minute, is this an old book or a new book?
That's
Is that where but she's out of Florida now.
Tampa, Florida.
Okay, this is out of Virginia on this one. She's out of Florida now, but you can see it teaches everything systematically, and the children can really read easily, and I think you should consider it. And everything is correlated. The
Are you
reading.
suggesting that our education establishment promote things at work?
Well, this is a teacher that developed it because she was frustrated because students couldn't read. And actually it started because her brother couldn't read, and she started doing this when she was like an older teenager. And then when she taught and found out kids couldn't read, she just kept perfecting and doing it, you know, and finally came up with this program. It was all piloted in her own room. And there's a lot of documentation and research to prove that the children can get good high test scores and they can read. Also, this book's been around forever, The Writing Road to Reading. It cost $18. I've used this too. As Dr. Hoover said, my children love to take 5-syllable words in first grade and break them up. They think that's fun. Bigger the better.
$18 versus thousands of dollars for okay.
This, I think, is about $18. I think this is $60 a child, and this is $18.
Wow. I think we'll probably want to talk to you more later about reading recovery, different.
Okay, and I wouldn't mind helping you with any of information or selection.
You're right here in town, Sacramento, right?
I'm about 12 minutes from you.
Okay.
12 to 15
All righty,
minutes.
we have two more people.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Oh, may I just say something? I have my daughter's test scores and report card attached. Please look at it, because she was really failing with the whole language approach. She was in the 29th percentile leaving first grade, and after a little less than 6 months on a systematic explicit phonics program, she went up to the 92nd percentile.
Why would you, as a pro-phonics person, ever allow your daughter to have any whole language at all?
Because I wasn't on top of things as a parent like I should have been. And I had overly educated my older daughter. She left first grade reading 5th grade level, and they didn't know what to do with her. So I said, well, I'll just let the schools do it, and I shouldn't have done it. I was wrong. And we had a mess.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
I think that's a very important point, because I am told by the unionized educrats that I deal with that the people who really are failing us are the parents. Now, you are a reading recovery teacher. You are a parent, and your daughter was having a problem. Serious problem. And I am told continuously that it's the parents that aren't doing a good job. It's parents who aren't reading to the children at home. It's not the teachers. It's not the system. It's the parents. And those are the people, I think, that is the culture that we have to attack, as Ms. Mazzoni had tried to point out, as to why we're not getting through. And so I think this is a very potent example.
Well, also, she doesn't, well, she's older now, but then she didn't like working with me, and I didn't like working with her because she always was tired, or she wanted to do it tomorrow or something. So, and also, I'm also an elected official, and I was just elected when she went into first grade, and it was overwhelming. So, you know, I spread myself too thin, and I wasn't on top of things.
How dare you expect these schools to educate children?
Well, I should have known better. Of all
Alrighty.
people.
Is Bill Franchini here?
I
Bill
think somebody
Franchini?
left here. I don't know what his name was.
Huh, well, okay.
May I also say, I don't think class size matters. I don't think it's going to change. I think that's a waste to spend the money in that area. And also,
Spend money
about
on what,
staff
class size?
development. Yes, I've taught up to 47 kids. The size doesn't really matter, in my
Would it
opinion.
have helped to have teacher aides helping you? If some of this money spent, for example, on reading recovery was spent on additional teacher aides, would that have been helpful
If
to
you
you?
let me use them the way I want to,
Yes.
yes. And when I want, because when I'm doing directed teaching, I don't want them there because I don't have anything for them to do because I need the children in front of me. So I want them when I want them.
Okay.
And also, you asked about staff development. It's also a waste the way it's being conducted. It needs to be revamped too.
It could be done right.
Yes, but the way it's done now,
And it could be done outside of regular school hours, so you don't have to take the kids out of class to do it.
okay, and you asked where did the whole language come from? It came from New Zealand. They promoted it.
I understand they're rejecting it now.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll be quiet now.
You have a question, Mr. Firestone?
You know me, do you remember me?
Okay, let's.
Okay, we got to move on here.
Sierra College?
Okay, Mr. Wurman?
Yes.
You're Mr. Wurman.
Ze'ev Wurman, it's kind of hard to pronounce.
You're with Hold.
Beg your pardon?
You're with the group Hold? Oh,
Yes, I'm a member of Hold. We live in Palo Alto, and we mostly deal with mathematics, but we observe certain things that are common, and that's why I'm here to testify.
We're in the middle of screwing that up right now.
Beg your pardon?
We're in the middle of screwing up mathematics right now.
You're right.
Don't worry.
Sacramento,
decided to-
Sacramento just adopted Mathland last night.
Oh, that's
Oh,
what
no.
I use.
Well,
Really?
yesterday night we had like 3 hours board discussion about adoption of Dale Seymour. Mathland was luckily rejected because it had too many errors, while Dale Seymour has only lots of omissions, but no errors, so they decided to go with it, maybe. We're still fighting. Anyway, I suggest we go back to the topic at hand, and I will skip most of my testimony because it's written and it's late, and it describes similar things that the parent from Marine described, the difficulty of convincing teachers, even when Bill Honig explained certain things, and you have some examples of that. But I wanted to come back to a couple of questions that I heard during the day. And just the last speaker mentioned New Zealand as the origin of whole language. And there are some things about New Zealand that people sometimes tend to ignore, especially if they are proponents of whole language. New Zealand government reports 25% of their kids in need of reading intervention after the first year of teaching reading. Now, 25% of kids, we have about 400,000, I think, per grade level in California. 25%, that's like 100,000, multiplied by the reading intervention cost, 2,000 or so. That's like 200 million only for one grade. If we come eventually to the situation that New Zealand is, fully whole language. So whole language is not a big success even in New Zealand. And let me comment, and they do have small class sizes, they do invest in a lot of this reading intervention, so it works eventually. And I have other things. I attached some excerpt from an international literacy study done in 1990 and 91 by the International Association for Evaluation of Educational Achievement. And they compared over 30 countries, their achievement in ninth grade, I believe, at age 9 and age 14 or something like that. I don't have the materials, you have it, I don't have a copy. The bottom line is, while New Zealand scored quite well in the upper third, and by the way, US also scored very high, when they separated the population in each country to the people that speak the native language of school at home and people that do not speak the native language of school at home, in New Zealand case, it was the Maori population, the indigenous Maoris, and they were only less than 9% in these New Zealand schools. But when they made the difference between the average scores of this minority population versus the majority score, New Zealand was the first among all the countries. They had 80 points difference, which is almost a full standard deviation difference between the minority population and the majority of it. Another nice example was Singapore, which is the other way around. Singapore has over 70% of students that don't speak English at home. But they don't teach whole language. They teach explicit instruction. And they have very low much lower than New Zealand difference between people that speak English at home and people that do not speak English at home. And they also scored on the total average quite high, much higher than expected. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that New Zealand is not panacea. They put a lot of resources in it. It works for them sometimes. It fails the minorities. We have here much bigger minorities. We don't have the money. We cannot afford the resources. Singapore is the other way around, and it works quite well for them. Then, a couple of last things. Somebody mentioned about, watching results of education, evaluating teachable results. I think Mr. Murray mentioned results as evaluation of teachers. And I just remind you that outcome-based education also talked initially about results. You're watching for the outcomes, but then it was hijacked by some people, and the outcomes became very attitudinal outcomes. I mean, the child likes to read instead of child knows how to read or is able to read. So beware of evaluating on results if you don't define the results very precisely, very crisply, because it's very easy to hijack this kind of things. Last point maybe that I wanted to make, somebody asked if it's possible for a school district to adopt a different curriculum, and the answer was yes, except for the instructional material where they need a waiver, and this is true. There was one component that was not mentioned. It's the assessment. Class, when it existed, pushed the school district to adopt the framework because it was testing on particular skills developed by the framework and was not testing skills that are traditional basic skills. Just beware that the new test will not become the same thing because it's a whip. No, you don't have to adopt the framework, but hey, your scores will be lousy. So just beware of the situation. But on the face of it, yes, you can adopt whatever you want. Thank you.
Before you move on to him, may I add something? My school district is going to be adopting the Reading Recovery program into every first grade classroom as a whole class program. So I will be putting aside what I know works, and I will be forced into doing this Reading Recovery model, but with my whole class. And so that I can work with like 3 kids at a time. I have to put the rest in these like little centers, up to 15 centers at a time. And so I just want you to know that that is a great big movement that's going on.
Why do you have to do it? You are the professional. I'm still troubled by this.
Because the school district has already done a day and a half, over 1 day of training and sent me to a class to watch it as they did all the other first grade teachers, and we don't have any choice.
Do you not speak up and say this is wrong, or that you're not going to adhere to it?
I talked to the assistant superintendent 3 times, and 3 of our teachers met with him on a Sunday and talked to him. So the best we can get is we can use what we want, which is sing, spell, read, and write, but we have to do the other, and we have to do the other, and when we have leftover time, we can try to fit this in.
So you ought to go meet with your school board members. You take a group of teachers who agree with you.
I don't think that would make any difference.
Let's wrap it up. Our last presenter, last but not least, John McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I almost expect a cheer because I'm the John McDonald behind whom there is no one. I'm a semi-retired attorney, and grandfather of 10 in Santa Rosa, and I'm going to follow Mrs. Mazzoni's admonition there not to duplicate anything. So I've passed out my 6 pages and will reduce it down to less than 1 page here. Most of it, things that have come up during your discussion here. Ms. Mazzoni's concern with teacher development. I was astounded talking with one of the few phonics teachers in one of our schools who has been censured 3 times for advocating the phonics instruction to the parents and so forth by the school superintendent, and she was telling me that an in-service training or the first period of the teachers get together during the year, they gathered in a large room and then went off into 4 groups Each was assigned a noise of some animal or bird. They blindfolded themselves and then walked around the room, mixed up, each one coming out with its caw, 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 or moo, 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 and the purpose was to find their own group again after they were blindfolded. And I says, what else happened there? What other purpose? She says, nothing. Period. She also tells me, and also a retired principal there that I work very closely with in Santa Rosa, tells me that in-service training also is very attractive to those teachers if there is nothing written, if they don't have to write anything down and much less be tested on it. They will flock to non-writing seminars where they can just sit and listen and then leave. One was a bus trip down to San Rafael to go through some bookstore down there. All these teachers, apparently for the purpose of expressing some opinion about what books should be purchased by the district, and it was just strictly an advisory trip so far as they were concerned. With regard to the matter of teacher training, the chancellor of the Cal State University system told us at the Business Education Roundtable 2 weeks ago that former Senator Gary Hart had been assigned a high position in the CSU system, and he is in charge of surveying the teacher training revisions for both math and reading. Lastly, Bill Honig tells me, he confirms what I had felt for quite a while, that I in Sonoma County live in a hotbed of whole language. Now, of course, we have Santa Rosa, Petaluma, Novato, and Palo Alto. They're having a terrible time too. It's interesting where these hotbeds are located and why. Sonoma State University is renowned for being much like a starter in French bed for a whole language throughout the whole area there. In producing radio educational talk shows with Alan Stock, who, Mr. Chairman, we just lost him to your Kojo in San Diego, Alan Stock. He is a talk show host now, very interested in education, and Alan Stock. And you will find him ready, willing, and anxious to help you with talk shows, whatever it might be, anything having to do with the education. But I find that the local instruction there in Sonoma County, fostered, I understand, and I've got the documents now, by the REACH program, which is a means of setting the money into the local areas, training the teachers and so forth in Ready, Set, Let's Read. And truly, lastly, on Alan Stock's program, I suggested that we go back to old-fashioned spelling bees. And he
What was the title of that publication? Ready, Set,
What's
Let's
that?
Read? The title of that publication was what? Ready,
Set, Let's Read.
That's one of the REACH
That was,
publications?
yes.
I've seen it. Yeah, I have a copy of that at my office.
Pardon?
I
Yeah,
have a copy of that at my office. That's funded by the department, right?
that's right.
And it's pro whole language?
That's right, and it is the basis for the teacher training, and they're going on 2 or 3 days a week.
And you're wondering if, yeah, you sent me a letter asking if it was ever officially approved, right?
I did. I sent the president of the state board,
Did the state board,
and she replied to me both by phone and by letter that no, it has not been. She had been assured by Ruth McKenna that it had not.
does the state board have to approve teacher manuals? I guess I should ask Ms.
This is not
Donenberg that.
I don't know that it's a manual. It was something that was developed, I believe, in 88, 89 came back and was disapproved, but then was reprinted and now is the Bible there in Sonoma County anyway.
We don't approve it, but it's not out. It's out in a draft. The problem is the draft is circulated.
And it says draft all over it, but but there it is being used.
Ms. McKenna, would you like to comment on?
I just had one comment. I have always been a big promoter of spelling bees. And on the radio, we had whole language people there and the county superintendent of schools there, and I suggested that one of the ways to test the reading ability and the phonics skills of students was to have old-fashioned spelling bees. And Alan Stock turned to the whole language supporter, and he says, well, what do you think about that? And she says, well, I don't see any value in being able to spell words in isolation. And he turned to me and he says, well, John, and I said, I just wanted to hear her say that to all the taxpayers and the parents and the voters throughout the Redwood Empire.
All righty. Thank you. Ms. McKenna, why don't you go ahead and...
Actually, I don't have much to add because Mrs. Dronenberg did say the status of that. That is, again, the reason that we have worked very hard with the board to produce a program advisory. The document Ready, Set, Let's Read was started many years ago. It was part of a completely different administration. We stopped work on it when I arrived here in May of 1995.
You're not printing it or funding it or sending it out anymore at this point?
No, but what has happened is that the drafts have been out there now for 2 years. And so we recognize the issue, but we are really trying to work on this systematically so that we put the policy in place, and then we will go about doing the new handbooks. The new handbook will be Every Child a Reader handbook, so there will be no confusion. And we're really trying to work with the board on this.
Have you sent out notices saying that Ready, Set, Let's Read is not officially sanctioned, and is not approved, and should not be followed?
We have sent notices to the REACH coordinators that the materials need to be revised. They've also had all have the copies of the Reading Task Force report.
Ms. McKenna, while I got you up here, Mr. Sweet, did you hear his comments earlier on the program advisory? Not the final one, but the one that was passed out here?
I don't think so.
He believes it. Well, why don't you summarize what you said to me about that? I'd like for you to respond to what you had said about that.
My concern, I just had a cursory review of it, so I don't want to make a definitive statement, but it included temporary spelling, it included phonics as one of the cueing systems, and the language that I read there, although it said explicit systematic phonics, didn't lead me to believe that there really would be much change in the final implementation in the classroom. As I say, I haven't read the entire document, but it looked very similar to other documents I've seen in other states that use the buzzwords, I might say, but doesn't have the teeth.
Not the theory?
No.
And that's not the final one, as I mentioned earlier.
No, I think that that when you actually do read thoroughly, that there is a significant change, and that the phonemic awareness piece and the use of early letters and early writing to actually assess phonemic awareness is an important piece. So we are not giving up temporary spelling because we do need it as a diagnostic tool. But we are certainly supporting learning to spell and learning to spell correctly. But I think that you will see when you do go through it thoroughly, and when we see the edited version, that there is a significant portion on systematic phonics, and I doubt that any teacher in California will think that something hasn't changed.
May I respond to something you asked? No, I'll just tell you personally.
Thank you, everyone, for being so patient. This has been an 8-hour informational hearing, probably the longest I've ever heard of, but it's been a fascinating topic, and this debate will continue, and I look forward to working with everyone here to implement good reading practices in our schools.
He's alive.
Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.